Hello and welcome to Graduate Theory. On today's episode, we speak all about mentoring. We spoke about mental health and how it works in with hustle culture and how those things can coexist and how to really look after your mental health, how to make sure you look after other people's mental health. And I think this is a really important episode. And given that we do cover some themes around mental health and things like that, if you do have any concerns or if you do want to reach out to people, there's links in the show notes so you can find out more if you do need to. I think this is a really important episode. We're speaking about important topics, so I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to Graduate Theory. Today's episode, we have not one but two guests. Both guests are working on a project called MentorFold, where they aim to connect up-and-coming graduates with early career mentors. My first guest studied IT and finished his degree in 2016. He previously worked at Apple and PWC and now works as a technical trainer at Microsoft. He's passionate about mental health. Please welcome to the show, Aidan.
Pleasure to be here.
Amazing. And the second guest today studied commerce at university. He's worked in many roles in Australia and through Southeast Asia in investing, business development, and communications. He's now an editor at Newsweek. Please welcome to the show, Eric. Well, thanks so much for coming on today, guys. And my first question for you both is around MentorFold. So you're trying to connect mentors and mentees, but what was the reason, or what was your inspiration for starting MentorFold?
It's kind of an interesting story because I've worked in quite a few corporate environments, right? So Microsoft and PWC, and it got me thinking. One of the experiences that I went through at PWC made me kind of realize, I don't really have anyone to turn to. And in a corporate environment, when you generally get a mentor, there's a lot of structure around it, right? You go to the mentor, you talk to them, and the mentor is like, okay, this is how your career will look like at PwC. This is what you can talk about. This isn't what you talk about. And it's really tied around, job progression and how you're doing. But if you have problems, if you have issues that aren't necessarily something that you can do with people at work, or maybe something to do at work, or it could be something like, oh, I'm thinking about moving to another job. I'm thinking about maybe trying a different career, maybe. You can't exactly ask someone or a mentor at, your job to do that, because they'll just be like, oh, why do you want to leave? What's the whole rationale behind this, right? The other thing that really led me towards it was towards the end of my experience at PwC, I wasn't having such a great time. And I really thought to myself, it would be really great to talk to someone about this, and really good to talk to someone who isn't necessarily part of the company, but someone I can still get mentorship from. Now, I say that, but that was a long time ago. That was about 3 years ago, right? Two years ago, roundabouts. And the idea for MentorFold didn't really take shape until literally a couple of months ago, where I was in the shower and I was thinking about this for some reason. And I was like, wait a minute, nothing like this actually exists. I don't think anything like this exists. And if it did, I would have 100% used it. So I immediately was like, okay, I need to get this down. I need to write this down. I need to work through it. I need to figure out what's going on here. And with that being the case, I hit upon this idea of MentorFold being a platform where you connect with a mentor. They're not tied to any job, not tied to any university. And you generally get a mentor that sticks with you from career to career. And from that point, it was an easy kind of thing because I had that idea and I was like, okay, well, I have an idea. I have a little bit of an idea of what it could look like, but I want to get some traction underneath it before I turn it into a proper startup. And I applied to the Blackbird's Giants program with the idea. And I was fully expecting not to get in because it's a competitive process and there's a lot of very talented people in the program. And then I got in and I was like, this is crazy. How did I get in? This just doesn't seem true, So at that point I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to work with someone to do this because I definitely can't take this upon myself to do it. And then I reached out to Eric because, Eric and I, we've known each other for how long has it been, Eric? Over 10 years, probably at this point. And I was like, Eric and I have built stuff together for over the past couple of years. And I was like, it's a natural kind of inclination to say, you know what, if I'm going to build this one with someone, let me build it with someone that I've known for so long and who I'm close to, even outside of working of a working relationship and go from there, really. And that's how it really got started. Just my personal experiences combined with a bit of luck and a bit of hard work.
Oh yeah,
That's how the best things start, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
it's amazing
Exactly.
what you can think of in the shower, right?
Yeah, I know. It's one
That's
top
funny,
tip for this podcast. Think of things in the shower. It's amazing. It'll do wonders.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, Eric,
Yeah.
what's your relationship been with mentors and things like that? Have you had it in the past or wanted one in the past?
Both. So when Buddy brought this to me, it brought up a lot of thoughts of how I had interacted with mentors and mentorship. And so I've sought mentors out privately, and I've also been assigned them from a corporate perspective as well. So one of the companies that I was working with, because it was a large international company, they're like, you're starting here, we need to assign you someone so you can ask questions who you don't report to. So there's not as much of a conflict. There's more honesty. But like Aidan said, there is, after all of that rhetoric, there is an underlying loyalty to the company and risks associated if you don't follow that as a mentor or a mentee, right? So that always seemed to hamper the level of connection that you could develop in that scenario. Whereas in my private life, like outside of a corporate kind of sphere, I went about mentorship a little differently. So I looked at who was doing exactly what I wanted to be doing, maybe 5 or 10 years down the road from where I thought I was. And I approached them, I sought them out. I said, I want to be doing what you're doing. Can I learn from you? Can I take you out to coffee? And that has been a much more fruitful and long relationship that I continue with a few individuals even to this day. So we're trying to create that for like everyone else, because that's been immensely helpful for both of us from a personal and professional standpoint as well.
I like that a lot, and I think one of the things that I think is really cool about that is your initiative in going out and reaching out to people, which I think is a stopping point for a lot of people, where there's a lot of friction between maybe you're sitting there, you're in the shower, maybe you're thinking, damn, I'd really like a mentor, but then there's this whole thing about, okay, who am I going to reach out to? Like maybe they won't respond, and kind of people can just talk themselves out of it or not even think that is something they can do. So I think that's a great example, Eric, of using your initiative and getting out there, and it's great to hear that that's been useful for you as well.
Yeah, it can be hard to reach out for a lot of people. And we acknowledge that, like, that's part of the problem that we're trying to solve. Like, what is stopping you from making the first step?
Yeah.
Like, you need to be introduced, or you don't know how to reach out, or it's just scary. But those are all valid points.
We joke around and we say that we're taking the friction out of like reaching out to strangers, because we do the reaching out to strangers for you. But, like it's an important part of seeking mentorship, right? You need to go out and put yourself out there. And while we can take a fair bit of that away from the conversation, you still have to go out there and be like, okay, well, I want to make a conversation with my mentor or with my mentee, even in some cases. And in order to do that, I've just got to bare my soul a little bit and just, form a connection that way.
For sure.
Yeah. What would you say someone's thinking about getting a mentor? I mean, what are the main things that you would want someone to take away from a mentor like relationship? Or even Eric, what's things that you've taken away from that, those experiences?
So part of what we're running up against or we're experiencing in building this community is that there's a general lack of understanding around what mentorship is. Like, to a lot of people, it comes up as a buzzword. So to our understanding, for our purposes, I guess it's a combination of guidance, mentee-driven coaching, and problem solving. Guidance is when you are looking for direction and you need someone to bounce thoughts off who's more experienced than you are. Mentee-driven coaching is where you say, I have a problem or I have a goal. I need to figure out how to get to point B. Can you help me? And it's not up to the mentor to drive your coaching or to drive your progress. You need to go to them as a resource, as an authority, someone who's more experienced. And problem solving, because you don't know everything. And they're going to have experience with problems that you will run into in your professional life, and navigating your career, and navigating even the workplace when you start work. And so for us, it's a combination of all those three things. And with that definition, that's what we want to build.
I think that's interesting. Yeah. And I like what you said there about, you've got to know almost like where your point B is, right? Before it's a nice thing to have a mentor. You're like, yeah, I've got a mentor, like I'm
Absolutely.
better than everyone, sort of thing. But it's like, okay, you need to like come to the mentor, or you need almost a reason why you're having someone there, other than just as like, just it's cool to have someone like to talk about your career stuff with, right? It's kind of this thing where it's like, okay, I have you around so that I can better get to this certain destination. And I think that's really
And
important too.
if I might cut in, like it's good for the mentor as well if you come to them with a point B, because if you don't, they get frustrated. Like, why am I meeting with this person? Is this a social visit? Do they want something from me? Are they trying to sell me something? Like, what is the purpose of this? And so if you go to them with like, this is my goal, this is my plan, this is a difficulty. How can I buy you a cup of coffee, or can I have some of your timing to see what your experience with this has been, or to see what your thoughts are with this, and then plan out a structure over the next week, 2 weeks, month to see how we get there. Yeah.
Just to add to that as well, I found that I've started to recently mentor people as well as be a mentee as well. And I found the best mentor-mentee relationships from my perspective have been people who like literally DM'd me on LinkedIn. And they'll be like, hey, I've seen your experience. I've seen what you've done. I really want to be in that same space. Do you mind if you take a couple of minutes to chat about it? And that's always been really effective as from a mentorship perspective, because you just say, okay, well, I've been in that position before. I've definitely been that clueless graduate where I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So when you get to the point where you say, okay, well, I have some experience now, I'd really like to help other people in that same position. It's a really great thing, because you're really just passing on that knowledge, and people after you don't have to make the same mistakes that you might have made. And that's one of the interesting things about MentorFold, is that we have a lot of mentors who've joined the platform, and every single one of them are like, we just want to help other people. It's nothing about getting paid for it. It's nothing about, maybe building a following. It's all about, I've learned all the stuff through a lot of hard work and dedication and a ton of mistakes. And I just want to make sure that the people who come after me don't have to make those same mistakes. And it's very altruistic from that perspective.
Yeah, certainly. Like, there's like that idea of like, paying it forward. And even once you're young and you've received advice or had a mentor, then, once you get that, get that feeling like, okay, I want to give back and give someone else that same experience as what I had. So yeah, I think this is really cool. And I like this idea about removing the friction between, of getting a mentor. I think it's really, really important. So yeah, I want to talk a bit about now. I know you guys are releasing a book soon, Eric. You mentioned that to me before the podcast. So what's the title of this book, and is it related to this project?
It is. It's called The New Job Code. We're planning to have it come out in January 2022. And we're positioning it as a guide to how the job market and the job getting process has changed from before the pandemic to how it is now. There's different ways to get a job, different ways to go about finding them, building the online presence that you need to have these days online. And there's a whole ton of different examples of that. So it's separated into 7 chapters, and we packed it full of like real life examples, like screenshots from every single step of the job getting process, including mentorship.
Yeah.
Good to put that in there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was really fun to write, because we just spent like, hours upon hours just talking to each other and be like, hey, do you remember that time that you did this? Or do you remember the time that you did that? Why don't we put it in the book? Why don't we just be authentic about it? And why don't we just talk about what we did and how we got to where we got to? So it was very fun experience writing. And we both think that there's a lot of really good information in there that people can really take away from it as well.
Yeah, because what let's say someone's going to read this book. What are some things that you want them to get out of it after reading the book?
We designed this book so you can pick it up and go, cool, these are actions that I can actually take that will get me results. It's a really short book, like considering how long books on this topic can get, right? It's 80 pages, which is not a lot. And there's lots of pictures and screenshots. So it's all really accessible, and we've tried to keep it that way as much as possible. So our goal for it is for someone to pick it up, take a look at it, identify with the problems that we outline in the first few pages, and then say, cool, this might actually work. Let's give this a try. And then follow the steps as we go down.
I think the best element of it is the fact that there's action points at the end of each chapter. So even if you go to the action points, say, have I done this? Have I done this? Have I done this? And have I done this? And then you could probably get to the end of the book. And if you tick through all those different action points, you can say, okay, I'm in a reasonably good place that I feel like I can get a job now, or I've been able to do this. I've been able to do that. I know what a resume looks like. I know how to write a cover letter. I know why people write those now, what the purposes of them are. And then you get to a really good position where you say, cool, I know how to look for the right jobs. I know how to create the resume and my cover letter. I know how to behave in an interview. I even know how to negotiate a job offer, because that's the one thing that I wrote in that book. And I was like, if I knew this, when I was a graduate, I probably would have been in a much better position back then than I was. And it's like I said, it's been on the form of mentorship in a way, because instead of talking to people about it, we've just written it down and we say, hey, take a look at this, because you're going to want to need it when you're in a negotiation position or when you're applying to a job or something like that.
We have a whole section on the different questions that you get asked in an interview and what they look like now as opposed to like
back then,
maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important that those things are. It's good to hear that they're, you're on top of it, and it's really a modern book. Because some of those things, that the interview questions might be like 20 years old. It's not really relevant for today's day and age. Are there any concepts or some of these action items and things from the book that you guys apply in your lives now?
That's a good one. Right. Did you want me to go? Yeah, there's actually quite a few. I think this is interesting because I've been applying this more and more recently. There's really plotting out what your next move is, or how to apply to a job, or how to look for the right jobs for you. Because I'm not a very organized person by any means, but after writing New Job Code, I was like, you know what? I don't really do this first bit. I should really make a conscious effort to sit down and make lists. And my wife, she's fully organized. So I talked to her about it. And she was like, why don't you just make a to-do list? Why don't you do a pros and cons list? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And for the longest time, I was like, I don't know. That's not really my style. But now it's like 100%. And I was talking to Eric about this a bit earlier. I had a pros and cons list about something we were talking about. I was like, this is how this looks like. This is how this looks like. And I've got a whole mental framework around that now. So I like allocate points based on how important it is to me and how not important it is to me. And I got a nice little score. And then based on the score, I can make a decision and be like, oh, based on all the numbers that I put together, this is the direction that I should go in, or this is the direction I shouldn't go in. And it's that's really been helpful. And that whole mental model piece has been great.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think that almost weighted matrix, a weighted decision thing, or, there's probably it could be a whole number of different names for it. But that was something that I've used in the past, not knowing that it was something that you could actually use, but making it big choices. I remember I was going to go on exchange and I was thinking about if this was a good decision, having those things like, oh, it's going to cost a lot of money. Like, I'm not going to be around, and it's going to be like, I'm going to be going to a whole new city. Like, I'm not going to know anyone. Whereas the pros are like, I'm going to get to travel around. I'm going to meet new friends, things like that. And then you try and do it as unbiasedly as possible. And then whatever, you get that score or whatever at the end, like you were saying. And then that kind of takes your emotion out of the decision almost. Because sometimes you can be making these decisions and then maybe it's something that, you get a bit more like emotional about, or it's something that can be hard to decide. And so having that written down in concrete can definitely make those decisions easier.
100%.
Eric, is there anything that you use or any key concepts from the book that are your favorites?
Well, maybe I've actually adopted some of this without knowing about it because we've written the thing. Right? There's a section in there on networking, and networking is like a dirty word. No one likes to do it. When you think about it, you kind of gag a little bit. But part of my journey, I guess, has been reframing networking as being about providing value wherever you can. And if you look at it that way, it's not about what can you get from this person that you're talking to. And you feel like you're harassing them. You have to scrounge around for a bit of time from. You're like, is there anything I can help you with? Like, is there a need that I can see or a connection that I can give you that's going to be beneficial for you, even if you're the CEO of wherever? And so the way that translates into the messages that you send out, the emails that you send out, the posts you make, the content you produce, it all comes together. I think that's really important. If someone doesn't already know that, then they need to learn it because that's how things work.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I've been reading this book recently called Give and Take by Adam Grant, and it's about this idea of being someone that's a giver versus someone that's a taker, and the idea of like, like you were saying, offering value to people with kind of no expectation of them doing something back for you, which I think is really powerful concept, like you were saying when it comes to networking, things like that, looking at people and saying, okay, where is somewhere that I can offer value to this person, or how can I do something for this person, and then creating a network that way. I think it's really powerful. One thing I want to ask too is let's say someone is finishing university and they're starting a new job. What are some key challenges that you think that person would face? And even what are some things that you would, maybe there's concepts from the book or advice that you would give to that person to help with those challenges?
It's an interesting question because the stuff that you know now is not the same thing that you know when you first started at a job, right? So if I was just starting out and I got into PWC and I worked there, I'd have been like, oh, go work at a Big Four. There's plenty of experience. You get to try different things. But being older now and looking back at that time, I would say to anyone who's just graduating out of university and looking for a job and haven't quite got one yet, I would say, don't go working for a big company just because you think a big company is the best thing to do. For example, here in Melbourne, the startup scene is amazing now because it didn't used to be that way 2 years ago. But after COVID, there's startups everywhere and everyone's hiring and everyone's got all this money from all the rounds that they've raised. And I would say that as someone who might be just getting into a job, the best thing to do for you is you want to accelerate your growth and you're at that age where you can take a lot of risks. Don't go work at a big tech company or a Big Four or a big law firm or whatever it is. Go work at a startup. Because at a startup, there's less people, so you've got more time with the people who make decisions. And at a startup, you get given more responsibility more quickly. And if you're the kind of person who says, I'm up for the challenge and I want to take all that on, then I'd say go for it. Like, you literally will be in a much better position if you can make it through. And you'll be like, I've heard of people who, they've started at a startup and they worked in product, and then 2 or 3 years later, they're the head of product. And then if they've decided to, they go to places like Atlassian or Canva and they're like a senior product manager. And they're, let's say maybe 22 or 23 or 24. And meanwhile, the normal kind of pathway to get into a role like that would take you all the way up until about 28, 29, if you were like really good at your job, right? So my main kind of advice for someone who's just graduating is don't think about it properly. Make sure that you're doing the best decision for you. And of course, if you've got other things you've got to think about, of course, think of those as well. But if you can take the risks and if you are up for a challenge, maybe forego working for a big company and go join a startup and see what that can do for you.
I'd like to build on that in 2 ways, because I absolutely agree. But specifically for any role, first thing is when you join, ask as many questions as you can while they still think you don't know anything about the role. Because you won't have that chance again, because they'll expect you to know all your shit. And the second point on deciding what kind of company to join, it's about knowing your limits as well, figuring out where those are. And that ties into mental health. So if you join a professional services firm, if you join a Big Four, anything, be prepared to work very long hours. And if that's the kind of work that you want to do and the kind of schedule you want to keep, then fantastic. But if you want to join somewhere where things are a bit more flexible and you can help shape the culture and the role that you're in, then maybe go for a smaller company.
Yeah.
These are considerations that have been important to both of us, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I think it's great that, like you were saying, Aidan, that the startup scene really across Australia almost is becoming something that's a lot larger, and it's creating a lot more opportunities for things like that, where if you're someone that's, a graduate, maybe you think you're nice and talented, you can go and get a good role somewhere, really looking at that other side and saying, okay, I don't actually have to go and work at a big established company where I'm just going to be, in a role like somewhere, but I can actually come and join a startup of a few people and, like you were saying, Eric, really shape the culture of the company and really build something in there. So I think that's really cool. I want to touch on as well, you guys are both quite passionate about mental health, and it's something that you mentioned before the podcast. how do you guys become passionate about something like that? And how does that, was there any kind of inspiration or any story behind your passion in that area?
It's just personal experience, I guess. So mental health has always been something close to my heart, and I could say the same for Aidan as well, through both personal experience and what we've seen in our peers around us. So we had a mutual friend of ours pass away when we were all about 23 years old. And at 23 years old, no one knows how to handle it. No one knows how to talk about it. And so you have to figure it out as you go along. And you can't compartmentalize it, really. It affects everything. And when those kind of experiences start to stack up, when those stack with stressors that you acquire from the workplace, from your family life, from your personal circumstances, or whatever you have to be going through, you don't fit the mold of what is expected in a corporate environment. And so it becomes your responsibility to figure out how to take on what you can take on and set what's appropriate for your own boundaries, at least from a work setting. On a personal side, that's a whole other question that you need to figure out.
Just to add to that, and this is like a personal story as well, but so when it happened, and this is back in 2016, and I remember because it was towards the start of the year and it's burnt into my memory a bit. And it's one of those things where, as a 23-year-old, you go through quite a significant amount of change at that point in your life, right? Because it's the cusp of maybe your early 20s into your mid 20s, and you're going from uni to a full-time job and things like that. So I was in my final year of university and I was doing my final year project, and I was dealing with a lot of personal issues at the same time, for a lot of family issues. And I had all of those things build on each other, on and on and on and on. And then when my friend passed away, and Long is his name, when he passed away, that was kind of if you're playing a game of Jenga, and I know this is probably a bad kind of a metaphor, but you're playing a game of Jenga and someone's gone for the bottom piece and just yanked it out and the whole thing falls over, right? And that's basically what it felt like for a long time. And, Eric can attest to this as well. Like, I went through quite a significant amount of problems at that point because I was like, work is stressing me out. I was working at Apple for quite a long, I was 4 days at Apple, 3 days at uni, didn't really have time to myself, had a lot of other stuff going on at the same time. And then all of that combined with, the trauma that you go through once, a close friend of yours passes away, and it breaks you. And you just think, okay, well, what do I do now? I don't really care about anything. I don't really want to reach out to anyone. I just want to sit at home and not do anything. And I think that this is why mental health is such an important topic for the both of us, is that we know what that's like. And to be completely candid, I've had anxiety from back then as well. And I've continued to have it for quite a while after that. And I was diagnosed with it and I took medication for it as well. And we know what it's like to be in that position. And we know exactly what it's like to feel a bit lost and a bit hopeless. And that's just really the reason why we really got into mental health afterwards, because we were like, if someone else goes through something like this, and if we can help just one other person, you've brought a lot more net good into the world, haven't you? Because you've really helped someone to dig themselves out of that kind of hole that, they might have settled into. And it's just one of the reasons why we're just so passionate about mental health. Just that and other things, and friends around us also going through similar issues as well. And it's been a very interesting experience looking at that.
There's not a lot of spaces in the discourse around the startup space, around hustle culture. There's not a lot of space in that for mental health. You look on Instagram on corporate accounts of startups, or you look on LinkedIn, and everything's shiny. Everyone wants to put the best foot forward. And these are people that go through things, and to deny that is to misrepresent, I guess, the reality of what it means to work.
Yeah.
People don't like to talk about that.
They don't. No, exactly. And it's just one of those things, I guess. This is going off on a bit of a tangent, I guess, but when you look at things like social media and stuff like that, and you look at the very curated feeds of people, and you say, oh, this person's killing it, they got a job at so-and-so, or this person's killing it, they got married, or they bought a car, or they bought a house, and other stuff. But it's a veneer on a lot of stuff that's happened in their own personal lives. And I could attest to that because, if you looked at my LinkedIn at the time that all of that was happening, they're like, oh, he's in this degree, he's going to get a job here. Everything's looking pretty cool for him. But internally, I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm stuck. All this stuff has happened to me. And it's just something that we don't talk about a lot.
Yeah. So to take it back to the topic at hand, I guess, when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, and you start a new job and it's full time, it's a massive period of upheaval. And, you go through the process of, I finish uni, I'm going to get a job, everything's sorted, just try and keep it together and do well at my job. But there's a whole other side to it. You have to manage that personally. And navigating that change can be really hard, especially if you have other stuff going on.
Yeah, that's a great story. Is there any things that you guys are involved with, or any things that you do to you continue that involvement and interest in this mental health space, and really try to help people as they go through that transition, starting your first job and switching that? Is there anything that you guys are involved with, or anything that you do to help with that?
So at work, I'm part of what's called the Real Mates program. And it's not just Microsoft specific. It's actually a program that was developed outside of Microsoft by someone who used to work there and then left to pursue it. But yep, that's definitely something that I pursue. But even from a personal perspective, it's just a matter of reaching out to people and having those uncomfortable conversations. Because the worst that could possibly happen is you reach out to someone, you say, how are you actually going? Is everything okay? And they just might be like, yep, everything's perfectly fine. Thank you for asking, But occasionally there'll be that one person who'll be like, no, everything isn't okay. And do you mind if we talk about it for a couple of minutes? And that's that opportunity. That's the opportunity of being able to say, hey, I'm in a position where I can talk to this person and let them know about my experiences. And they're in a position they've put themselves out there and they say, yeah, I'm willing to listen and I'm willing to talk. And you might, avoid a situation like what happened to us when we were 23 with one of our friends. Like, it's really just a matter of making yourself just a little bit uncomfortable, but you don't know what you could do. You might end up saving a life.
And that seems like a pretty stark juxtaposition to talking about how do I get my first job?
Yeah, it really does.
Mentorship.
But look,
it needs to be part of the conversation.
It does, yeah. And look, part of MentorFold isn't just the fact that you're mentoring people through their careers, but there's also other problems that arise. And one of those big issues that happens when you look for a job, or you move to another job, or you're not sure what's happening, is your mental health, And it's really good to be able to talk to someone and say, hey, I'm struggling mentally with this decision I have to make, or this thing that's happened at work. And just being able to talk to someone about it is so much more than what used to happen back in the day. And that's one of the things I really love about kind of our generation and the generation that follows us, is that we just seem more open to talking about mental health and talking to people about it. Whereas you didn't see the kind of thing, 10 years ago where people would just be, hey, I'm not doing so well, or I'm going through this. And it's good. It's a lot of positive change that I really enjoy.
Specifically, I guess one of the initiatives I've been involved in recently, there's an app called Mindcare Club that's currently it's grown over the last year and a half around Southeast Asia, specifically the Philippines. It's a telehealth counseling app. Counselors register on it and people sign up and they can go on their phones and just call someone. I think it's like a subscription. So actually it was started by another friend of mine who also died, but that was his legacy and that was something I helped him plan out a little bit. So that's something I try to stay involved in and keep tabs on.
Yeah. I think it's a great point, and I think it's something that like you guys have both said, that needs to be discussed and like kept in the dialogue, right? Especially when, let's say, you go into a startup or you're working at a consulting company or wherever it is, and you're working 60 hours a week or whatever, and you're really grinding. You want to like you were saying, Eric, put your best foot forward and show the world what you can do, but you don't want that to come at the cost of your mental health, and really like keeping that kind of idea of career, doing well in your career, being physically healthy and mentally healthy, and that's what makes a good career almost, is having all those things in good condition, right? Because one of those not quite there makes things difficult. And it's important that, like you guys were saying, those people that, it's hard to get that out of someone, right? It's important that you check in on your friends and make sure that they're doing okay. Yeah, I think it's a really special story, and I think it's important that, like, it's great to hear that you guys are both involved with things like that too, to improve the dialogue around this kind of thing. Because as much has been done in the last few years, and like you were saying, Aiden, our generation is pretty good at it, but there's still work to be done, I think, around even just people being more open with sharing their mental health and it not being seen as this weak thing to do, to share how you're going. Because I think sometimes it can be like, well, I'm not a tough guy if I tell people that I'm not having a good day or my home life isn't very good or things like that. So yeah, I think it's really cool that you guys are helping to create that space and helping to improve that. Yeah, I think it's really cool. Well, yeah, one thing I want to touch on as well is, I guess, your experience with this mental health area. What tips do you have for someone to check in with someone? Is there any, like, Aiden, you're saying you send a message. Is there any other things that you guys do, or any even things to look for in someone that they're not doing okay? How can we realize that earlier?
It's a good question. And when I speak about this, I'm not speaking in any professional capacity whatsoever.
Yeah.
I'm not going to claim that I'm anything like that. But the way that I usually look out for, signs of someone possibly going through things is, it's usually kind of the obvious signs, right? So maybe not reaching out as often. Maybe you've noticed they're not spending time doing the things that they actually like doing. Even things like, you reach out to them and you make plans and they say, hey, they're going up until the date, and then they bail and they're like, oh, I'm just so busy with everything else. One thing that I've noticed, especially for people who tend to be, type A, got to get stuff done, got to finish everything. One thing that I've really noticed what they do when it comes to mental health issues is they bury themselves in work. So they'll be like, oh, I'm too busy. I've got to build this thing. I've got to build that thing. I've got to do this. I've got this other meeting. And if you've noticed that they're doing what more often than not, then that's a good sign to be like, okay, well, is it that you're actually busy, or are you just trying to give yourself a lot of busy work to distract yourself from something else? So really, and once again, it all just boils down to just ask them a simple question. Hey, are you actually okay? And if you got a good enough relationship, or even if you don't, they might just be like, you know what, I'm actually not. And it goes from there.
So I will say also that I'm not professional, like neither of us are. We just have personal experiences, and there's ample literature on this from resources like Beyond Blue or Headspace, that if you're really interested, you can go and look up yourself and become acquainted with what the signs look like, what the symptoms of depression and anxiety and other conditions look like that people may be going through, whether they admit it or not. But something that's not talked about that often, it is not coming across as performative so not asking that question out of the blue, like, are you okay, without first building a sense of vulnerability and trust.
That's very important. Very important.
This is one of the problems that I see sometimes with initiatives like the Are You Okay Day. Right? If you ask a question just for the sake of asking it because it's that day, no one's going to give you a straight answer. But if you take the time to build a relationship and create a space where they feel like, I'm not going to suffer ramifications of this, like if you talk to HR at work or something like that, and it's a conversation born out of genuine connection, then that's usually a lot more conducive.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so important. I totally agree. Definitely. One thing, I've got one more question for you guys before we wrap up, and that is, we've spoken about this mental health and how that's so important. And it's important to check on your friends and things like that. What is some advice that you would give someone starting their first job, whether it could be to do with mental health, and that's obviously an important piece, but is there anything that you would, even if it was yourself when you were starting your first job, what advice would you give yourself there? Maybe we'll start with you, Aidan.
It's good. There's a lot of advice I think I would give. I think going back to my conversation about startups and corporates, I'd probably say, take the time to research all the options available to you. And if it makes sense, go start, join a startup, or even better, start a startup. You're young, you've got time. and it might work out really well for you. The second thing, more specifically to do with the mental health conversation, is make sure that you're taking the time to preserve your own mental health. And one of the best ways of doing that is, setting boundaries. So if you think work is too much, set a clear boundary. Say, this is overstepping the bounds that I'm comfortable with, and therefore I'm not going to do it. Or communicate them clearly to other people around you as well, so they know what you can do and what you can't do, and go from there. And I think the third kind of piece of advice I would give, and this is probably more general, is when you start a new job as a graduate, find out all the people that are going to be in your team and take every single person out for coffee once, and make that a goal. In the first month, I don't care how many people it is. It could be 5, it could be 10, it could be 20. Might be a bit expensive, but just do it. Take every single one of them out for coffee and get to know them a little bit. So ask them what makes them tick. Ask them, what their kind of work experience is, what they do at work in specifically, and, just get to know them. And you'll tend to find that A, they're grateful because, free coffee, who doesn't love that? And B, they get to know you on a personal level. And because of that, it's a lot easier to get to grips with the team, get to grips with the work, and you have those actual connections formed within the first month. Whereas, a lot of people who tend to be quite introverted, don't really talk to anyone for, a few weeks, and you just need to break out of your shell a little bit to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Eric, what about you? Any advice that you would give someone?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was supposed to graduate, I had a mentor at the time, one that I sought out. Like, I went to his speech and we started meeting regularly. And this is some advice that he gave me that I took 2 years to act on, which is to build something, create a visible identity or content or something that you can be proud of outside of your role, whatever it happens to be. And that does a lot of things, right? It gives you confidence. It requires you to build the skills required to build whatever you want to build. It's a lot of good things. And it means that you are visible. So and that's something that we can now point to. Like we both have our own online identities that speak for us. And that's something that we go into in the book as well. But if I had started it earlier, it would be so much better. It would be so much more valuable. That's definitely something that I would tell anyone who's early on in their career or even still in uni. Build something you can point to and be like, I built that. It's a demonstration of what I could do.
Just to add on to that, James, you've pretty much done that, hit that on the nail right there, on the head, I should say.
Yeah.
With graduate theory, right?
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah.
Shining examples.
Yeah, that's a great tip, Eric. No, certainly, I totally agree with both of you, and I think that's really profound advice. Because Eric, what you're saying about building like almost your personal brand, I think is so important, especially in today's day and age where you can have things on the internet that are just there. Someone having to meet you or spend time with you, they can see what you're about and they can see the things that you've created. I think it's so important, and like with you, Aidan, I think it's great advice too to connect with your team and even through the wider organization, really starting that networking is something that you do proactively and, really creating a network, as much as you can, especially when you're early on. I think it's really, really important too.
So if I could add on to what Aidan was saying before, I think it's important to acknowledge the caveats that come with setting boundaries, especially when you're starting out. You want to be high achieving, you want to make a good impression, like I said before. And it can be hard to say no or know how to say no. And that can be, that's a difficult thing to navigate. So you take a lot on, but I will say that the first few years of maybe your 20s or your career is the time where you get to test your bandwidth and see, how much work can you do? How much can you take on before you feel yourself starting to burn out? And then you stay in that range.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think, one of the keys around that is like, okay, yes, I'm going to take on that extra task, but that means that I'm going to do this other task slower. So you not necessarily having to say no, but making your manager and whoever is giving you work aware that, you do have plenty to do. And I think that's so important too, because you don't want to become someone that just says yes to everything. You need that space for yourself. Absolutely. I totally agree. Well, yeah, thanks so much for coming on today, guys. It's been a really cool conversation and a really important conversation too, I think. But before we go, I want to ask you, where is the best places to connect with both of you and even to find out more about MentorFold and find out about this book that's launching next year?
So you can visit our website at mentorfold.com. We're growing much faster than we thought. So we've onboarded mentors from Google, Microsoft, Bain Company, Deloitte, KPMG.
Telstra.
There's much bigger
Quite a
names
few. Yeah, there's a lot of big names
than
up
we
there.
had anticipated.
Yeah.
So, well, anyone who's in university or even just after university, I think this is a great resource that I wish we had when we were starting out as well. And the book will be on there as well. If you sign up, we'll send it out to everyone on our list and on social media.
And speaking of social media, you can get in contact with us on LinkedIn because we're both on LinkedIn. We can drop our link. I'm guessing you'll put it on the
I'll
post
put all
here,
all the links I'll put in the show notes. So if you are interested
Yeah.
in connecting with these guys, we can do it in there. But
Yeah. Open to connecting or answering any question, really.
Yeah, it'd be cool.
No biggie.
amazing. Well, yeah, thanks so much for the chat today, guys. Thanks so much for listening to Graduate Theory. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Aiden and Eric. I certainly got a lot out of it. So if you want to find out more, if you want to get involved with Graduate Theory, what you can do is you go to graduatetheory.com and there you can read my takeaways and what I've learnt from this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing on whatever podcast platform you're on. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, if you could leave a review, that would also be really appreciated. If you want to get new episodes into your inbox every single week, please go to graduatetheory.com, subscribe to the newsletter, and there you get the new episodes and my insights delivered straight to you. Thanks so much again for listening today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.